All right. Due to some insanity, we're at our third try of recording this episode.
Yeah, this is reminiscent of asking a buddy, hey, you have a VCR, right? Okay, we're going to come over with a 4-hour silent film.
We did that. When I worked at Blockbuster Video, we rented D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation.
It was Birth of a Nation.
And we didn't have a VCR.
But we had to see this movie that night.
You knew somebody with
this. Like, I really got to get up in the morning. Oh, it's almost over, bro.
You knew somebody with a VCR.
If I recall, the TV and VCR were in this dude's bedroom. So he's like wanting to go to sleep, and we're like, no, dude, you got to watch this.
You got to see this. This is a seminal film in the history.
Bro. And
we watched this 4-hour silent film while this guy was just sitting there wondering why the hell he let us use his VCR. That's, ladies and gentlemen, you haven't been privy to tonight, but that's what tonight feels like because this app, this is the third time we're trying to record this episode. I think we got it now.
We've fired our producer.
Oh yeah, Gene is gone. Yeah.
So.
All right, so I'm Snags.
And I'm Ol Silky.
This is the third time we're saying this. Hey, check out the snagsandsilky.com. And, when you go there, you can hit the click pit, and we'll drop all the links to all the wacky stuff we're talking about in these episodes.
Exactly. And hit them with that new
email.
So
the email, if you guys want to send us comments or suggestions or insults, is info@snagsandsilky.com. So hit us up with your grooves. So tonight we're really trying to cover the actor Peter Boyle, and we're going to try again. So Peter Boyle, he grew up in Pennsylvania. His dad was a children's show host named Chuck Wagon Pete. And
Chuck Wagon Pete.
He hosted Uncle Pete Presents the Little Rascals, which is a local TV show. And Peter Boyle then studied acting with Uta Hagen of Def Leppard fame. Uta Hagen, Glappen Glieben. And then
the Rock of Ages bio song.
Right. And so his first big breaks were a touring version of The Odd Couple. And when that went through Chicago, he quit so he could join Second City. With John Belushi and John Candy and all those cats came out of Second City.
Yeah, Eugene Levy, Gilda Radner.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Gets a small role in Medium Cool, which is kind of a cult classic that I haven't seen all of yet. It's on YouTube. And then his first major role of note is in this film Joe from 1970. In this
really dark film.
Yeah. And you'll see Peter Boyle ends up in quite a few of these classic 70s dark films. So there's this ad executive named Bill Compton, played by Dennis Patrick, and his daughter ODs but lives while she's living with this hippie drug dealer. So Bill goes over to pick up her stuff, and while his daughter's in the hospital, gets in an argument with the boyfriend and ends up killing him. The daughter runs away again. She finds out he killed her scumbag boyfriend.
Live-in boyfriend, yeah.
Yeah, and then Bill meets Peter Boyle's character, Joe Curran, in a bar, and they bond over their hatred of hippies. Anything else to say about this?
Well, Susan Sarandon is just doe-eyed, beautiful in this. Very young.
She was actually
gorgeous.
Smoking at one time, yeah.
But I felt this movie really spotlighted the Americana circa early 70s. Vietnam blue collar versus highbrow businessman. They meet head on. You got that savage twist at the end. But them meeting head on, and you've got this highbrow businessman. He kills that boyfriend, and Joe figures it out. So now he kind of has to hang with this guy, and you find out that he wants to hang with him because he did kill somebody, and so he's envious and wants to do more. Their hypocrisy comes back horribly so, because all the their hatred for this younger generation and things they're doing, as soon as they get a chance to do so, they're partying, they're banging, banging these hot hippie chicks, they're doing all these drugs, and of course you have to see the ending, but it's that classic tragic ending, similar to like Easy Rider.
Easy Rider started the trend. All these gritty 70s flicks had to have a tragic downer ending, which it became a cliche after a while, but still it's better than the smarmy happy endings that just feel saccharine and fake a lot of the times.
In a way, it was a great alternative to just how many movies a happy ending, and it's like, hey, this is real life. We're Vietnam. We're Kennedy assassination. We're life is not always happy.
Altamont and Charles Manson, things got pretty dark after that.
Yeah, Kent State, bitches.
Yeah, mofos. Anyways, so I'm reading about this flick. We were both really hardcore fans of a few movies that Peter Boyle was in, so we already knew who he was. But I'm reading about this specific flick in Quentin Tarantino's Cinema Speculation book, which is awesome, and we'll drop a link to that in the Click Pit. And he's talking about this flick, and he mentions that it's an obvious influence on Taxi Driver, which Ol Silky and I were obsessed with back in the 80s, and classic film. And I start thinking about Peter Boyle was in Taxi Driver too. And then we start talking about Peter Boyle and decide to do this episode 3 times apparently. And so after this flick, he's offered the lead role as Popeye Doyle in The French Connection. And he was in a movie theater screening of Joe, and there's these rednecks in the movie theater that are cheering on the killing of all the hippies. And there was no punk rock at the time, so there were no punk rockers to also help cheer on the killing of the hippies. It was just dumb rednecks. And so Peter Boyle was horrified, and he was going through a little no violent movies phase. I will no longer do any violent movies. So he turns down the role of a lifetime that Gene Hackman just knocked it out of the park as Popeye Doyle in The French Connection.
He really owned that. For sure. And the sequel is even better than the first one.
I was wrong, actually. There were 4 punk rockers in the 70s, Iggy and the Stooges. But other than that, there were no other punk rockers in 1970.
Oh,
all right.
1970, yeah.
So,
MC5, maybe.
They were proto-punk, but really the Stooges were recording punk rock when the Beatles were still together, and they're the only band that you can say that about. All right, so moving on. He played a campaign manager in The Candidate with Robert Redford. We're not going to cover that. We're just shouting it out. He played an Irish mobster opposite Robert Mitchum in The Friends of Eddie Coyle. Ol Silky has seen that, highly recommends it. We're not going to cover it. We're just going to shout it out. And that's all we have to say about Joe from 1970. You ready to move on to the next flick there, Ol Silky?
Yeah, that's cool.
So the next Peter Boyle flick we're going to cover is Crazy Joe. Similar title, totally different movie. 1974.
Yeah, this is not a sequel, kids.
It's not like Joe, Crazy Joe, Wacky Joe, Over the Top Joe. No, Joe was one movie, and Crazy Joe is a completely different movie. And this one is a rare, just flat-out starring role for Peter Boyle. He's the main guy, the head honcho. He's portraying real-life gangster Crazy Joe Gallo. And this shows his rise through the ranks and the obstacles along the way, and we won't give away the ending. Although probably if you look up Joe Gallo, you'll find out what happened to him. It's also got supporting role by the legendary, iconic Fred Williamson, who we will probably do an episode on at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And
Fred the Hammer Williamson.
It's got the Fonz and Tattoo from Fantasy Island. So there's an all-star cast in this.
Henry Winkler and Hervé Villechaize.
Yeah. Anything you had some thoughts on Crazy
Well,
Joe. Why don't you lay those
so Joe
thoughts down?
Gallo's biopic, Crazy Joe. It's a good action flick. Um, Mafia in the '60s. Like you said, a lot of great character actors. But I think this was riding the wave that was started with Godfather 1 and 2. It does not have that slow artistic build, almost like, painting a work of art is a slow thing that Coppola brings to it. It's more kind of jumps around. It really centers on all the violence that was throughout that time period.
Yeah. Uh, The Godfather was legendary producer Robert Evans and legendary director Francis Coppola. Crazy Joe was kind of half-assed producer Dino De Laurentiis, and Carlo Lazzani directed it, who I don't know too much about. But the poster, by the way, if you look up the poster's freaking awesome. It's a total.
Yeah, I do like that.
Yeah.
And the thing is the Mafia at that time in the early '70s, they were still very. They had their hands in everything, so it's very possible.
Yeah, unlike today, where there's no corruption
to do
anywhere.
This movie, they had to make it the way they did.
Yeah.
Where this was still kind of hot.
Yeah. So
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it's a good flick. Got some real life events too. The whole. I mean, it's based on real people, so the backdrop of you got Vincent Coletti in there, who founded the Italian American Civil Rights League. That's covered in the Irishman movie on Netflix, and you paint. What is it? You Paint Houses. What's the name of the book?
It's called So You Paint Houses.
Right.
Which is a great book. It really touches on, who killed Kennedy. There's really not a mystery if you think about
the mob. The mob did, apparently.
The mob was, they were in thick with Joe Kennedy, and they put JFK in the White House so that they would have, ties to the White House. So it was a done deal, and then Bobby turns around and just goes after Jimmy Hoffa on such a grand scale that they're like, okay, if we kill him, John is gonna just end us. So instead they take him out, thinking that Johnson will just replace him as replace Bobby Kennedy.
Do I recall you telling me not to go on any side tangents before this? We recorded
it's all Mafia,
Right. Anyway, so all of that is in So You Paint.
A great book.
All of that is in So You Paint Houses, but then so are some of these other events that you see in Crazy Joe, and the other flick, the miniseries about the making of The Godfather, has a lot of this stuff too. The thing about Crazy Joe, which you can find on YouTube, we'll drop the link in the click pit, is that this was made right after all that stuff happened. It's fresh.
Yes,
unlike those other.
It was wide open, and probably tread lightly because the Mafia was in full swing at that time. You had to really watch what you did.
Unlike now, where there's no corruption. Anyway, jokes aside, Young Frankenstein is the next flick, and we'll be talking about that right now. Yeah, Young Frankenstein. So, 1974, and I think you had a pretty good scenario description of this to lay down for these cats.
Oh, yeah. Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks, brilliant homage to the Universal horror movies that there were like 38 horror movies that Universal did from like 1932 up to the 50s with the Creature from the Black Lagoon series. And it just really kind of retells the Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein movies touches on Son of Frankenstein, which is the third one, but I think there were 5 Frankenstein movies altogether. But this classic comedy inspired Aerosmith to write Walk This Way, based on Marty Feldman's little gag of, they get out of the carriage and he's like, here, walk this way. And he goes up the steps a certain way and they start to follow him. And he's like, no, like this, walk this way. And the guys in the band just thought that was, and it's very silly, but it's just hysterical in a Three Stooges kind of way. And I think Tom Hamilton told Steven Tyler to write a song called "Walk This Way," and that's that's the story behind
the
that
rest
song.
Is history, right?
Great stuff, though. A lot of great gags throughout. Marty Feldman is just hysterical, playing off of Gene Wilder's character as Dr. Frankenstein.
And Peter Boyle plays Frankenstein's monster in this and does a great job. He's hilarious. I have vague memories of my parents taking me to this as a kid. So I was 5 years old in 1974. So I was there, man.
You're old.
Yeah, well, we've established that in all the previous episodes, but I am OG, and so are you, by the way, motherfucker.
Yeah.
So right. I am OG Young Frankenstein though, because I was in the theater, man. I was there on the front lines back in the day. Yeah.
I think I saw this in a drive-in.
Yeah, you may have.
I just seem to remember a drive-in.
We both had hippie parents who would have taken us to this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. My mother took me to some really inappropriate movies. So
yeah. So anyways, another interesting fact about this flick is Peter Boyle met his wife on this production. She was a journalist covering the production, and turned out she was friends with Yoko Ono, and through that, Peter Boyle becomes friends with John Lennon, and John Lennon ended up being the best man at their wedding. So that's phenomenal.
So then you got Yoko in your wedding pictures.
Yeah, there is that.
Kind of a drawback, but
that was before
you're hanging with JL.
Yeah, that was before Photoshop too. And I was joking on the previous attempt at recording this podcast. So I was Silky's best man at both of his weddings,
nice.
And Peter Boyle had John Lennon. So I think you probably should be jealous of Peter Boyle because John Lennon.
My mom thought that John Lennon was my dad, but that's another story.
Oh yeah, your mom thought you were the love child of John Lennon. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, kind of a connection there. Strange.
We both had crazy parents and crazy upbringings, and we may do an episode on that at some point. So
yeah.
Anyways, that's all we got to say about Young Frankenstein. You ready to go on to the next flick?
Yeah. Anyone out there that does therapy, do not email us, okay?
Okay. Well, we're too old for therapy. As Lemmy once said, I'm too old to find God now. So this being the third time we recorded the podcast tonight, we made it. He doesn't want me to mention that anymore. We made it through Taxi Driver the first time, but we didn't make it through the second attempt. So this will be our second run through of Taxi Driver, but the first one that you guys hear, and that's all that matters, really.
That's right.
Yeah. So in Taxi Driver, Robert De Niro is a loner cab driver anti-hero in New York City, trying to make connections with other humans, and briefly tries to date this campaign worker chick played by Sybil Shepherd, which fails.
Sultry, sexy.
Back in the day, way before moonlighting, kids.
Wow. She was briefly dating Elvis at that time.
As did quote-unquote dating, and, Elvis was always dating like 4 chicks at a time.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. He was, and he would tell them all, at least the biography I read, he would tell them all that they had to be faithful.
Yeah.
Don't you go messing around with no other man, and you neither. But anyways, So,
that was a spot on Elvis impersonation.
hey, I'm great at the I'm about to do Peter Boyle in a minute, so get ready.
Yeah.
So basically, Sybil Shepherd thing falls through when he takes her to a porn movie on the first date. Then he starts befriending this underage prostitute played by Jodie Foster, and gets white knight syndrome and thinks he needs to save her, and everything unravels from there. And he really,
yeah, these are all people he interacts with driving around in his taxi cab.
yeah, and he basically just slowly loses it. But there's this key scene where Peter Boyle, who plays Wizard, who's another one of the cabbies, is counseling him because he's talking to Peter Boyle and saying, "I really feeling like I'm going to do something bad, blah blah blah," and the monologue that Peter Boyle lays on him is so good. I've got to perform it for you, cats.
This is a rare performance here.
Dramatic performance
given by Snags.
All right, here we go. So
make it happen.
Yeah. So he looks at Travis Bickle and he says, "Look at it this way: a man takes a job, and that job, I mean, like that becomes what he is, You do a thing, and that's what you are. Like I've been a cabbie for years, 10 years at night. I still don't own my own cab. You know why? Because I don't want to. That must be what I want. To be on the night shift driving somebody else's cab. You understand? I mean, you get a job, you become the job. One guy lives in Brooklyn. One guy lives in Sutton Place. You got a lawyer. Another guy's a doctor. Another guy dies. Another guy gets well. People are born. I envy you your youth. Go on, get laid, get drunk, do anything. You got no choice anyway. I mean, we're all fucked, more or less, To which Travis Bickle replies,
he says, that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because he's building up to really do something, and I don't, you almost wonder if he's already plotting to try and shoot Palantine, or I think more so I lean towards my interpretation is he is really at the end of that being directionless, and he's going to strike out. Yeah. He's either going to go kill Palantine or go save this girl. Right. I think that's what he finally settles on.
Right.
And but I love when he at the end he says, don't worry so much, because Travis Bickle is like this direction, like a boat with the rudder broken off. He's just floating, and I think we've all been there at certain different ages. I know for me, when I was watching this movie constantly, that's what drew me to it. Is just that's how I felt. I felt so just thrown out in the deep end of the pool with no direction, no one really there to kind of guide me or show me the way. And a lot of us tend to do that, and only you can take care of you. If you're not taking care of you, who else is gonna? You have to do it yourself.
There's actually a Kiss song on their phenomenal art rock disaster album, The Elder, called "Only You." So just remember, listen to that. Only you have the answer.
Yeah, and I believe in me, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We gotta do an episode on disaster albums at some point. But anyways, so this flick was written. So Paul Schrader moves to L.A. to get into the film business, and he's just alone in this city and massive metropolis.
Amongst the naked city.
Amongst all these
Kiss reference. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, also film noir reference, but so he wrote this script as a way of processing his just feeling alone in this vast city. And I can relate to that because we watched this movie in high school obsessively, and then right after high school, I moved out to LA to get into the film business, and that's when I understood Taxi Driver. I was like, this is fucking it, man. Just city full of strangers. It's crazy.
I remember specifically. I would cook myself dinner and sit down and just hit play on the VCR, and it would just pick up from where I left off before, and I would just watch Taxi Driver while I ate.
This is when you were after you left home, but before you got married, and you were living in a dump.
Living out in Brookhaven.
In a dump.
In a fairly suburban type house, but I had one side of the house.
No, you lived in
this guy Greg had the other side of the house.
You lived in a dump in Little Five Points for a while. That was a dump.
Oh, yeah, that's about as homeless as I ever got.
Yeah. That was.
I don't count living in a Gremlin back in the 70s with my mother.
So we had some interesting childhoods. All right, so this movie was really the first time I really took note of Peter Boyle as an actor. I was like, this guy is brilliant, you know.
Yeah, and, he lands it just as this kind of, and I think we've all had a younger kid kind of pour his heart out, and you're so much older, and you see how silly the drama or somebody so much younger who really doesn't understand life yet, and you're like, dude, you think it's bad now, and I envy your youth line. It's so easy to catch some kid in his 20s who's just like, oh man, poor me, and you're like, dude, you don't even know,
right? And that's my famous stages of life thing that I made up. It's like when I was young, and when I was in my teens, I wanted to be a rock star. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a famous film director. When I was in my 30s, I work in marketing, right? So I was like, I wanted to work in marketing and have a career that I was interested in. And now I just want to not be homeless between now and when I die.
But I watched this more or just as much as John Hinckley.
Who
took kind of the motivation of this movie, one part of it,
and went and shot Reagan.
Reagan.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get Jodie Foster, who was in Taxi Driver.
Yeah, he was obsessed with her.
Stalking her. And it just crazy how...
Yeah. You and I watched it obsessively, and we just ended up doing a podcast. So it's probably a better way to go.
Yeah. So, we win. We're not in jail, and he is. So.
That's right. So this one, along with Clockwork Orange and Blue Velvet, those kind of our holy trinity back in the 80s. We would watch those VHS tapes over and over again, along with some other flicks like Where the Buffalo Roam and Caddyshack and stuff.
Yeah.
So, we done with this? We ready to move on to the next flick?
Yeah. I think if you Taxi Driver is a must own. You just
that's the
De Niro
one.
was on fire.
Yeah.
Godfather, Taxi Driver, Deer Hunter,
Raging
Bull, King of Comedy.
King of Comedy,
was it, man. He just owned it.
Yep. Back before he was a second-rate comedy actor. All right.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So the next flick we're gonna hip you cats to is this one is on YouTube. The Brink's Job, which is 1978, and Peter Boyle's got a small but significant role in this one. And I'm gonna let Ol Silky lay down the narrative for you cats.
Yeah. So the Brink's Job is a true story set in 1950. These guys, all kind of white collar crimes or blue collar, whatever you want to call it. They had been in and out doing mischievous things, but these guys robbed the Brink's main office, just surveillance, watching this place like clockwork. They minimal security, and every night at 7 they would leave, and 1-2 guys there. it was just a very easy robbery. So these guys, they did their time. They got put away for 14 years, and the FBI only ever recovered 50 grand. But I believe they got away with $2 million. And Peter Boyle's character, McGinnis, was a real person. He refused to hand over the loot. Very similar to another Scorsese movie, Goodfellas, where they steal a bunch of money. The idea was to sit on this money and let the heat cool off, and you had some characters kind of flashing the money around. And there's a really good scene where Peter Boyle, his character, is in this huge argument with Peter Falk, because Peter Falk wants his money, and Peter Boyle's kind of the voice of reason. Like, look, you're not getting this money right now. We've got to be cool here. But that money, to this day, I believe, was never recovered. It's kind of a nice black eye for the FBI.
So so this is a good flick. Peter Falk really rocks this flick, and then Peter Boyle is a supporting character. He's in it a few times as a money launderer who's done he's done big jobs before, and he ends up getting in on a job with Peter Falk before everything goes south. So
and this was a more popular heist movie. And you had a lot of heist movies here and there. I'm thinking of the one, the Sting 2, just different heist movies.
The Sting was phenomenal.
Brink's Job was definitely one of the better ones.
Yeah, and the Sting was phenomenal, just as a side note.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the sequel's not as good as the first one.
Yeah. All right, so anything else about this before we move on to the next flick?
No. Brink's Job's another really good, and I think a big movie at the time.
Yeah, it was a good one. It was entertaining. So the next Peter Boyle movie we're going to hip you cats to. This is probably the darkest movie of the ones we're discussing. It's darker than Joe. It's darker than Taxi Driver. I think we both agree Taxi Driver is probably the best movie of all these that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But Hardcore is definitely the darkest. Also written by Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver. Directed by Paul Schrader as well. Why don't you lay down the summary for these groovy cats?
So this is about a very staunch religious father. The character's name is Van Dorn, played by George C. Scott, who's divorced. He, in public and at church, he's just this great, churchgoer, good Christian man, probably very typical of your 70s, a character you would have known for sure. And then, but at home, he all but ignores his daughter. Really, kind of, she is just miserable, and her first chance to go off to see the world, she goes on this church trip and promptly disappears. And so, Dad, the concerned dad, the good religious dad, goes, on a tear through LA looking for his daughter. So he leaves like Wisconsin or, wherever he's at, and goes to LA and meets Peter Boyle as a private detective. But, I just personally, I saw how obsessive somebody in religion, somebody in the porn, it can destroy families and, break things up. But, I think you're supposed to watch this and think, oh, that poor religious man. And there's so much hypocrisy here. Religion is definitely not always for human consumption.
I think Paul Schrader was kind of making that point about, how idealistic people can be, and then just how dark and gritty things are underneath all that idealism.
Yeah, and both, both of them, for sure.
And
but
this was one of the last gritty '70s films before the family-friendly Hollywood '80s came in. And one thing I thought was interesting is that the film that really kicked off the '80s family-friendly zeitgeist that kind of killed all these interesting filmmaking of the '70s was Star Wars. 1977, good flick for what it is, but it basically ended up bringing us Gremlins and all the rest of it, right?
And kind of Spielberg, George Lucas kind of went more lighthearted family, whereas Coppola and
Paul Schrader, Scorsese, and all these cats were doing
all from the same, gritty New York City,
streets.
Underbelly.
They were from the streets. So
from the streets,
yeah.
And dare I say, more relatable topics, because
for us
it was real.
Because we're
real life. It wasn't E.T. hiding in your closet eating Reese's Pieces.
Anyways, but you see in the daughter's room, you see a Star Wars poster on the wall. When they're in L.A. trying to track the daughter down, you see a Star Wars billboard in the background.
Yeah.
And so you see the slow creep of the 80s makes little cameo appearances in the probably one of the darkest, grittiest films of the 70s, 1979, last gasp of that kind of filmmaking for the most part, although there are some 80s films that kind of...
Yeah, Bronson made some tremendous movies in the 80s.
J. Lee Thompson.
Because the 80s took off with your actions of Chuck Norris, Charles Bronson, Schwarzenegger, Stallone. But they were all fighting for that top seat.
But specifically, if you're talking about this gritty 70s style filmmaking, and this is another thing that I was hipped to by the mighty Quentin Tarantino, and I've been watching a bunch of them lately, and it's true. J. Lee Thompson, the director J. Lee Thompson, who did Guns of Navarone and Cape Fear back in the day, in the 80s, the original Cape Fear, in the 80s, he's making these films for Canon Pictures with Charles Bronson, and he made a handful of them, and they are just as dark and gritty as anything that would have been made in the 70s.
Bronson was taking on a lot of, taking on a lot of topics that people didn't really want to discuss.
Especially in the 80s.
Like Kinjite with the trafficking.
I think
not enough of that. People want to just la their way through and watch another
so
the Family Ties.
We'll do an episode on those J. Lee Thompson Bronson flicks, but
sure.
The Evil That Men Do, 10 to Midnight, Kinjite, Forbidden Subjects, Messenger of Death. But anyways, those were the exceptions. This was the last real big splash of gritty filmmaking before the 80s kicked in. Anything else you want to say about this one before we move on?
No. I definitely a very dark movie about the horrors of religion in the porn industry, for sure.
And there you have it. Okay, so this next flick we're going to talk about is one that we also used to watch obsessively back in the day, Where the Buffalo Roam, 1980. Why don't you lay down the scenario for these cats?
With Where the Buffalo Roam, 1980, Bill Murray, replaced Chevy Chase in the 70s in Saturday Night Live. He was just the new guy with the mustache. Then he, quickly kind of worked his way into our hearts as, Bill Murray was just hysterical. And, you saw him in Caddyshack, Meatballs. He was on his way. He was getting in the foot in the door and doing bigger and better things. And then along comes the chance to play Hunter Thompson, kind of in true Thompson fashion, just this lashed together pile of almost vignettes. There's
Hunter Thompson fucking hated this movie.
Oh, did he really?
Oh yeah, he did.
Well, I think it hit close. It hit too close to home because
he thought he was oh, they're making a mockery of my work. He thought it was too much of a comedy.
Anyway,
I love it. It's my favorite Hunter Thompson
got all
movie.
These great scenes of just being goofy and fun. Now, to me, it goes along. You've got bits of campaign trail, bits of the Great Shark Hunt, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 3 Thompson written books, all kind of lashed together to make this movie. But it's very funny. I think it captures the zaniness, the gonzo, wild time of Hunter Thompson for sure.
And Peter Boyle portrays the Mexican-American attorney and politician Oscar Acosta Fierro, who was basically Hunter Thompson's real-life sidekick back in the day.
Yeah.
And Peter Boyle plays him, and he's hilarious. In this like semi-fictionalized version of Hunter Thompson's life, by the end of the movie, Acosta's trying to get him to go down and help him start a revolution in Central America.
Mexico,
yeah.
Which it's funny because it's almost touching on that movie Walker that Peter Boyle was in, to go down to Nicaragua and start I think it was a nod to that in its own way.
I'm gonna watch. I think Walker was after this. Walker was in the 80s.
Yeah.
That was Alex Cox, another actually really good filmmaker from the 80s. There were some good ones. Alex Cox did Repo Man and Walker and Straight to Hell, which is hilarious.
Oh gosh, great one.
Yeah.
I did not really like Walker, but some great actors in it for sure.
I've got it.
It's tremendous.
I ordered the DVD because Peter Boyle was in it, so I'll hip you to my review when I watch it.
That's not one that I think I would watch again. So I'm glad I saw it, but but
I'm gonna mail you the DVD so that you have it.
If you can get the one that opens with the Four Tops singing "Sugar Pie Honey Bunch,"
that's the only one. So for a while, Where the Buffalo Roam has a phenomenal soundtrack, and for a while there in the 90s, whoever owned the rights to the movie lost the rights to the music, and they put in all this generic crap, and it was just terrible.
It just kills the energy of each scene. You're like, what the hell? CCR has some great tunes in there.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix is just Neil Young singing Home on the Range.
And here's the deal, though. If you find this streaming, it's on Amazon. If you find it streaming anywhere, we'll drop a link in the click pit. It's going to have the original soundtrack now. Those horrible dark days.
Okay.
Those horrible.
I wasn't sure.
Oh no, I am sure. Those horrible dark days are over.
Oh, good. Thank God.
Yeah.
Because I would, it's just not the same movie, and I would hate for anyone to see that. Just abysmal version. So,
but this is a great flick to watch over and over and over again obsessively because it's just hilarious. Yeah. Anything else about Where the Buffalo Roam?
No, that's just one of Bill Murray's best.
Yep, absolutely.
Right up there with Caddyshack, just same caliber.
Yep, I agree. All right, so the gritty, radical kind of 70s movies are over. This next one we're going to talk about, Peter Boyle's got a significant role, and we both liked it. It's kind of cheesy in some ways and interesting in some ways. Is Outland, 1981, and probably would not have got made if it weren't for Star Wars. Star Wars, after that, everybody made a sci-fi movie for the next 10 years.
Sure, yeah.
But the summary of this one is another one that Ol Silky prepped a summary for us. So
all right.
let's all listen, kids.
Well, you mentioned Star Wars kind of jumping off. I think E.T. was 1980, but you had Alien and Blade Runner,
Yeah,
which were more darker, futuristic,
badass
Blade
flicks.
Runner, just one of the best noir movies ever,
and best set design,
tremendous soundtrack,
in the history of
backdrops.
film.
But
yeah,
Outland is basically High Noon set in space. High Noon being the 50s Western with Gary Cooper, sheriff comes to town, gets kind of embroiled in the corrupt town, and he's going to do something about it. The whole town turns their back on him, and he's basically alone to face off the gang that's going to come back and get him out. And that was High Noon. So Outland, is set in the future. Here's this lone mining post out in the far reaches of space, and Sean Connery's character is going to go and do a year term as the sheriff. And he gets there and meets the people running the mine, running this operation out there, and
Peter Boyle being the main guy.
Peter Boyle being the head honcho, running this mining operation, and this giant ship and these tremendous backdrops, just really well done on that level. The thing that endears the movie to me, though, is that 80s DOS computer look. It's all futuristic, and here's this just ridiculous small screen,
and then the
green lined.
The phones have cords.
Font, yeah.
There's a few flicks. There's some great Roger Corman sci-fi flicks, Forbidden World and Galaxy of Terror. And
great one.
In that way, this reminds me of those that it's set in the future in space, but it's so 80s. It's obviously the 80s.
Just archaic and primitive on some levels. Maybe due to some type of limitations of being in the far reaches.
They meant to do that.
Make up excuses.
They totally knew what the future would really be like, but in this narrative, you can only use DOS computers because of the Schlesmoli computer virus, which killed all modern computers.
Sure, I mean, you could work it, but Alien was such an iconic movie, and then Outland, like right on the heels of Alien, you almost watch Outland and wonder if you're going to see Sigourney Weaver popping through,
But Peter Boyle is he's a corrupt manager of this whole mining operation, and ends up getting in the conflict. Basically the showdown is between him and the sheriff, and things get nasty. But I think Peter Boyle does a good job. It's definitely, as you've mentioned it, kind of a two-dimensional role, but that goes with the whole changeover into the 80s mainstream film thing.
And even though, we say two-dimensional, he's still
Peter Boyle.
Believable in this role. It's just not a lot of, range. It's just, he's waiting for the end to take care. What they're doing is they're bringing these, they bring this drug, they smuggle this drug in to the mine, and they're giving it to the employees because it makes them work faster. This specific mine is hitting the numbers, setting records. They're working twice as hard and twice as long. The problem is overexposure to this drug at 10, 12 months in, you got guys like ripping their helmets off and imploding. And Sean Connery starts investigating some of these deaths. And they're like, you got the doctor going, oh, this was an accident. Connery's like, who the hell rips their helmet off in space?
Yeah.
But just some great scenes, and you do get that same helpless sense of urgency from High Noon and in Outland, where your hero Sean Connery or even Gary Cooper is asking for help, like, hey, you guys gotta help, and everybody's just checking the clock, keeping an eye on the clock, knowing that at a set time these bad guys are going to show up, and the showdown begins. And in both movies you're like, holy shit, is no one going to help him? And you're reminded of like Death Wish with Bronson, just one guy against
one man,
everybody
against the world.
So,
yeah, it's a good flick. It's fun to watch.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah. So those are the flicks we're covering. Peter Boyle went on to continue acting in film and television throughout his life until he died. He's very famous with all the square people who aren't into the cool shit for Everybody Loves Raymond. He was in that for a while, which we're not going to cover.
A sitcom I don't think I ever watched.
Yeah.
I know it. I'm not saying it's a bad show. I just personally was usually working at night.
Yeah.
And,
I was watching good stuff like Seinfeld.
Right. Like Seinfeld. Anyways. Yeah, so that's Peter Boyle, kids.
Yeah, that's Peter
Get
Boyle.
The T-shirt.
Yeah.
Get Taxi Driver and Young Frankenstein, if nothing else. As intense as his dramas were, Young Frankenstein and Where the Buffalo Roam are just as intense, but on a lighter comedy.
Taxi Driver
side.
Taxi Driver and Where the Buffalo Roam. I own those both on DVD, and
Absolutely.
you just have to buy them now without hesitating. So
yeah, and I have those two and Young Frankenstein.
There you go. He has
anyway.
He has one more than I do. Yeah.
See how that works.
All right. All right. Well, that's it. We got anything else to say? Or are we gonna just?
No.
We're gonna bolt on these mofo's.
Tune in next Thursday. Drop some reviews. Let us know what you think, or
email us at info@snagsandsilky.com so we can disregard your feedback.
Send us some rant, and maybe we'll mention.
We may read it on the air.
Yeah. Become famous.
All right. Later.
All right, kids.
Peace out.